you everyone for, first of all, giving me your attention for this conference. I'll try be quick because I know we're a little bit over time. So I'm briefly just going to chat about one of my honours level undergraduate projects, the Virtual Environment for Glaciology Simulations, or VEGS for short. So in this 10-minute whistle-stop tour, we're going to cover the main concepts behind VEGS, findings from the project, what the slogan by undergraduates for undergraduates really means, and the next steps for the project in the future. And I have a tendency to chat a lot when I get nervous, so Chris, if you would just give me a wee shout in case I ramble on too long. Anyway, let's get started. So what is VEGS? VEGS started out with simple aims and simple motivation. It was to be a website resource acting as a sort of one-stop shop for glaciology students at the University of Aberdeen, and was created to aid 3D spatial thinking skills for students, particularly those who had less opportunity for fieldwork. So that sort of audience I was catering for was those stemming from the Geography Honours undergraduate course. Because in that course, there was a lot of variation in field trips, and while, you know, seeing a river one year and going to the coast another year and looking at some glacial deposits the next year is all very useful in developing your practical fieldwork skills in terms of building upon your 3D spatial thinking skills specifically for glaciology and cryosphere science, that variation doesn't necessarily help build that up. So its tagline, by undergraduates for undergraduates, is going to be revisited a little bit later. So listen out for that. And the creation of this website was hoped to make glaciology materials easy to find and access, as well as help with independent learning skills. And just a brief aside before I go any further, you might be thinking, hey, this sounds really like Antarctic glaciers. And in all honesty, sites like Antarctic glaciers, VR glaciers and glaciated landscapes, these were some of my key motivators, my key inspirations for producing this resource as part of my undergrad project, as those sites have been really useful to me in learning so many concepts of glaciology in collab with my lectures and my studies at the university. What do I mean by independent learning skills mentioned on the bottom of this slide? Well, the next wee diagram will hopefully explain it. People like myself, like undergraduates, rely on being taught material in lectures. And for example, I didn't know what a moraine was, let alone what a moraine really looked like, until I was told by my glaciology lecturer, Bryce, sorry if you're listening, who told us during a field trip in northeast Scotland that we were all, in fact, standing on top of a moraine. Maybe it's kind of embarrassing for me to admit this as an inspiring glaciologist, but you know what? I own it because it reinforces this idea of undergraduates as dependent learners. We rely on being taught by those with more knowledge, and through 3 to 4 years of university, our own independent skills of researching and reaching conclusions on our own merit is developed. So by coming back to this moraine incident that I had, after depending on my lecturer to identify the landform and tell me how it formed, I could then take the knowledge gained from that and from class to complete 3 glaciology-themed independent research projects in my honours year. And I was able to take the knowledge gained and feel confident in researching ideas around glaciology for myself based on this. So my supervisor for these projects would get some of the more complex and obscure questions regarding theory and concepts thrown his way, but concepts of simplistic...
Yeah, because that's why I got an invite to that.
Concepts like formation of crevassed glacier ridges and glacier physics, I would go and check out sites like Antarctic glaciers. And to come back from my tangent, where VEGS comes into this is by supplementing the development of the independent learning skills of the student and relying on your own research and freeing the student up to talk to supervisors about larger and more complex questions. So I'm just going to quickly skim through the next section so we can basically get to the insights, which are kind of my opinions as an undergraduate. So in my data gathering period over a month, I found 40 online resources. They had to be engaging to undergraduates with suitable academic level of content and with clear communication of the science behind the resource. In other words, they really needed to be designed primarily for teaching, not just illustrating and supplementing research done. What I found was that although there are many wonderful resources for glaciology out there, Areas like 3D models, interactive simulations, game-based learning are really lacking, and resources that focus primarily on teaching glaciology to the undergraduate level are unfortunately kind of few and far between. This is just some of the data from my honours project, and if anyone has any questions, I'll happily chat about it in the question period later. So through my findings, led to this question of, well, why don't we have as many teaching resources? And there is a discrepancy, particularly I find, between 3D modules created for geology versus for glaciology, and I started to wonder why. Is it because geological concepts are quote unquote easier to explain, easier to see and access in field, so it's easier to make resources for them than for glaciology? Is it because we have digital elevation models and glare software for glaciology, and it means we don't really need more resources? The simple answer is, I don't know. I don't know, and that's probably a really unsatisfying answer, but let me explain why coming to this conclusion by creating VEGS isn't actually a failure. It's actually a bit of an enlightenment. To quickly recap what VEGS is, the project is started out as a resource builder for accessibility students, but from its findings, it's highlighted a gap in the market for teaching resources that specifically focus on interactive simulations, 3D models, and other engaging and, as Bethan put it, funky ways of communicating science to others. And from starting out trying to build a website resource, I've actually highlighted more than just a gap in this area. It's highlighted potential ways to improve the teaching of glaciology and how we engage with current undergraduates and how we bring the student to the centre of creating these resources. It also has the attributes of developing key skills that graduates need for going into the workforce. And as we can see from the bullet points, which I won't spend too much time as I don't have that to chat through, these are really key things like independent learning skills, thinking on your feet, being able to find and search and be confident in your decisions, all these soft skills that sometimes, especially in science, can kind of be overlooked. When I'm talking about by undergraduates and for undergraduates, I came up with this concept as part of my project that, well, why don't we put students in the centre of resource building? You know, sort of increasing communication between the knowledge sharers and the learners, asking what are the difficult areas in the topic. You know, perhaps someone finds the movement of glacial till under ice sheets difficult to understand. So from that, the student maybe puts together a storyboard on how we visually communicate this effectively. Because ultimately, undergraduates in this sort of cohort of undergraduates, we're digital natives. Like, I've grown up surrounded by the internet, by technology, and unlike some previous generations who are having to adapt to new technology and didn't have this literally from birth, their resource sharing and their way of communication just might not be as effective as more digital means for this cohort of undergraduate learners. Obviously, putting undergraduates in the centre of building resources is, you know, it's got to have its difficulties, and it's obviously very expensive time-wise and may not fit into the academic curriculum. But putting undergrads at the centre of resource creation will encourage subject engagement, and oftentimes involvement can spark a newfound interest for the subject. There's just so many areas that have yet to be explored, and hopefully VEGS can provide a catalyst to start doing this. Just another summary, just quickly to wrap up here. VEGS started as a resource building concept and ended up exploring the intersect between pedagogical techniques used and application of digital resources to geoscience. And in its own right, it could be a really useful tool for teaching glaciology and supplementing class use, much like Antarctic glaciers is. However, I think it's perhaps a better phrase with it is its bigger purpose is to act as a catalyst for more research and resource development and teaching and communicating glaciology to everyone. And also the manuscript gives an undergraduate perspective of glaciology teaching, as obviously I can only comment from my own experience. I don't have years of watching the cohorts come in and graduate and knowing what works best, so I can only comment from my own experience. So just to sum up quickly, What are the next steps of VEGS? Well, they're still in the works. I'm hoping to take the manuscript to publication and exploring research options in the small but quite cool niche of glaciology communications and teaching. Whether VEGS will be a fully functioning website for undergraduates to access is currently unknown, but it's hoped that the fallout from the project will impact teaching and communication of key glaciology concepts for future students. Again, as an undergraduate, I can only speak from my experience in academia so far, and so I gladly welcome discussions from everyone in this webinar. So I will end it there, and thank you very much.